electroactivated chemotherapy. Just electroactivated chemotherapy. Forget innovative potential. Forget everything else. This is the one that really kind of binds everything together. And it's kind of the hardest to wrap your head around because it goes so deep into like the molecular bio. And so I'm just gonna start off. This is complicated. This is hard. You thought the cancer biology wheel episode was hard? This is even harder, because electroactivated chemotherapy got started back in 2009, and it was started as a fluke of an offhand comment of a lab mate, and from there we kind of went on just to see it fulfilled and completed, and that's just sort of what we were doing there, and then it just sort of got jazzy after that. So the basic overarching idea is, so where does it come from? So this presentation is on the website, the Innovative Potential website, but this is my thesis presentation for electroactivated chemotherapy. But we don't actually use any EAC or electroactivated chemotherapy nomenclature until we get to the 2013 publication. Electrochemical activation of chemotherapeutic prodrugs that mimic P450 catalyzed oxidation. All of that's EAC. That's one behind the paywall. If you're interested, email me and I can get you a copy of that. Otherwise, consult your local universities. It's up there on the Canadian Journal of Chemistry. I'm not going to give this presentation. It's pretty straightforward, and I've kind of beaten around the bush about it. But basically, we're asking, can you use a local treatment to treat a local disease, or improve the successful chances of a metastatic disease by locally targeting problematic areas? The short answer is yes. Despite what you kind of hear on the those banner headlines for clickbait articles where it's like, does your dog smell like cat food? And like, no. This is the one instance where it's like, yes. So the idea here is to just bypass systemic circulation of the drug, use higher local concentrations with smaller amounts of the drug versus your conventional therapy. So how does that even work? So here we have our straw man. And what we're kind of talking about, in the middle there's someone with a 50-gram tumor, and going left or right of this person, you have two treatment options. If you give the person the same amount of the 1 gram of a drug intravenously, that more or less just diffuses out throughout the body. It's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more complicated than that. Because each tissue type is going to soak up or metabolize the drug that you give at a different rate, and these rates are reasonably well known. That's sort of the whole idea behind toxicology, where it's like, no, it's kind of your job to figure out how the body behaves with regard to this molecule or this class of molecules or whatever. That's its own industry. For finding safe and usable consumer chemicals. But basically, in this example, and even in the real life scenario, the amount of drug that's given is diluted. You lose, if you only have 1 gram, you only end up with like a 3 to 1% actually applied drug in the area or region that you actually want it to end up in. And that's just regular body. But in this straw man example here, if you go to the left of the person into the sort of lighter white or teal color, that's intravenous injection, and you only end up with a 0.07%, 0.07%, sorry, amount of original drug being actually effective. But if you give it to an intratumor, if you take that drug and then dilute it in the volume of the tumor, you can have, a significant. You can get 100% target site coverage, and that's just sort of like that's the basic logic. It's a straw man. Yes, people are there are drug nerds out there that are just gonna go crazy for pharmacokinetics because that's what they do. They take a molecule for like osteoarthritis that doesn't necessarily get an option to be directly injected because it's a daily use type of drug. So that's sort of the angel and the demon of this electroactivated chemotherapy kind of thing, where it's like literally everybody else in the industry works within the framework that we're going to give you the drug multiple times until the course of treatment is over with, or until you've saturated, or until we have to take you off of the drug, or until we have to find a new drug. But the point is, we're giving you the pill, and the pill is easy because the pill is easy. You don't need a surgeon to do the pill. EAC requires a surgeon and a surgery suite, and like it's simply the most expensive thing you could possibly do, short of teleporting the tumor out of the body. And we don't have teleporters yet. But EAC does open a couple of doors that normalized or traditional chemotherapies can't do. They can't do it because it goes against the mechanism of distribution. It's not a mechanism of action. It's a mechanism of distribution that stops these EAC drugs from actually being useful. And what's kind of going on with EAC is we're using the sort of the metabolic processes that typically destroy or alter chemicals for excretion. So what happens there is, as the actual chemical therapy treatment, and we use that machine to do it. That's the idea. So what's happening here is it's phase 1 and phase 2 metabolism, where you get the P450 activation. The drug gets oxidized into a more reactive state and then conjugated. We found that if you can do the activation and conjugation step inside of the tumor, that actually, kills the tumor or kills the monolayer of cells, if you have to be pedantic about it. But that's one of those things. The physics is there. I'm not arguing against the physics of spatial volume. What the metabolism does, well, that's what we're fundraising for. So basically, this is what EAC is. So on the left-hand side, you have P450. And on the right-hand side, okay, there we go. So then on the right-hand side, we have electrochemistry. And what we're doing is directly paralleling them and forcing the person to look at them as essentially the same process. What the iron catalytic center is doing with oxygen, the anode is doing with electricity and water. And it really sort of opened my eyes up to something that was like just ginormously missed when this kind of came to fruition in terms of when I was first exposed to it. When I was first exposed to it, I just finished my 4-year bachelor's in biomedical toxicology, and the machine aspect of this never presented itself until I entered into physical chemistry and electrochemistry. And that's sort of where this image, and that's sort of where this image comes from, because the example that we were talking about in the lab was acetaminophen. And the example you hear in your coursework is, oh, people sadly attempt suicide with it, and the P450 reaction there it is how the suicide works. Basically, is the mechanism of action for the suicide. So you have the iron in the liver and other parts of the body, but basically the detoxification mechanism for the acetaminophen gets exhausted, and then it starts attacking the cells through this mechanistic step here. So the S in this example, the S in the bubble there, it would be acetaminophen coming up to the iron and the iron oxide, and then being oxidized into a more reactive intermediate. The intermediate then eats up all the glutathione that's available, but because you've overdosed on it in an attempt of suicide, you end up with this situation where once the detoxifier is exhausted, you can start attacking cellular components, and when the cellular components get attacked, that part there, that's the part that kills you. It exhausts the cellular components, it exhausts the cells, it exhausts the liver function, and the person dies of a liver failure, essentially, if there's no medical treatment, blah, 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 blah. But acetaminophen is also used a lot as a standard in electrochemical detection. And when you have acetaminophen as an electrochemical detector, with an electrochemical detector, it's the anode splits the water present in solution and creates the same. And it's an electrooxide. It's an anode with a functionalized surface that presents an oxygen in much the same fashion as the P450 does. And then that reacts with the acetaminophen, and you get your voltamic linear sweep voltammetry, and you get some of the other analytical techniques. But the same thing is there, and the whole point of electroactivated chemotherapy is to make use of this phenomenon, this machine, and this parallel. So yeah, this right here, this image, this screen, this is what electroactivated chemotherapy is all about. Basically, we're using electrochemistry to mimic a P450 oxidation process, and then we're reacting it in aqueous solution, and then directly injecting that reacted molecule into a tumorous or cancerous environment. And I prefer tumor in this instance because the tumor doesn't necessarily have to be the cancerous cell. And from the cancer biology, it's the microenvironment that has to be stopped. This is one way to get control of the microenvironment that has a constant positive osmotic pressure. And when that osmotic pressure, what that means is basically the tumor environment is pushing, is working against absorption of drugs from the surrounding healthy tissue. So it's creating for itself a little density bubble. And drugs can't get through, oxygen can't get through, nutrients can't get through. A lot of the stuff in there are just sort of like clean. There's necrosis in it, but what you really want to do is be able to just like disrupt the whole, if you can't cut it out, the whole thing. And radiation does that, but radiation goes through the healthy tissue to pass through the regular tissue and then pop back out on the other side, kind of thing. So there's always room for improvements until we can, like I said, until we can teleport it out. There's always room for improvements. This is one of them. So the whole point of electroactivated chemotherapy is twofold. It's to make use of the prodrug, and I guess I'll call it the prodrug and drug pair. In this case, it's acetaminophen and benzoquinone. There are others. I'm just going to stick with acetaminophen. It makes everything easier. So that's the first thing. So you have to have a prodrug drug pairing that's able to function electrochemically. And then the whole part of that's the electroactivated part. So the idea here is you actually do get a non-toxic or relatively non-toxic shipping and distribution type of supply line available to these types of drugs, particularly if the active compound doesn't happen until it's been oxidized. So the toxicity of acetaminophen compared to benzoquinone is orders of magnitude, period. They're just orders of magnitude from prodrug to drug. So that when put in the context of the healthcare system, where you have, not only do you have your chemical manufacturers creating the starting synthesis materials, but then you have your shipping and distributors, you have your storage personnel, then you have your manufacturers, then again on top of that you have your shipping and distribution of the drugs. And when you actually get to the drugs after the manufacturer stage, they have a lot of times you end up with something with a shelf life, or it's effervescent. By doing by looking at the electroactivation portion in terms of adding a linker molecule that stabilizes the whole formulation, or that stabilizes the reactivity of the compound, and that's really where your money and your industrial valuations are going to come in. When you go talk to your chemist and say, can you put a sugar molecule on this to stabilize its reactivity so that it doesn't end up being so reactive? That is literally the case example for cyclophosphamide or Cytoxan. They took a nitrogen mustard and added a stability feature to it that gets electrooxidized off to create a reactive molecule. So it's not horseshit, not blowing smoke here. It's already been done. We're saying, let's open this up. Let's get the tools out there. Let's get a new breath of fresh air, so to speak, into that division or sector of the industry, because it's just better. It's like if you can reach more. Well, the whole world has 24-hour shipping, so. What COVID has taught us is basically you can't really depend on that. You need something to be able to stabilize it. But that's sort of what that electroactivator is for. It's like if you can make a formulation or a drug that has that gets 6 extra months of shelf life, and then it gets activated into its active form, and then gets applied directly to the patient. That's great. That you can open up a couple of you might even be able to open up some antibiotic stabilities or something like that. Like it's vague and hopeful, but that's usually where most of the fertility is, in vague and hopeful, and that's just experience. So the thesis identified cyclophosphamide, and I'm gonna find a picture of that. There it is. Too fast. So this is cyclophosphamide. And it's like the prime example of electroactivated chemotherapy because it's an actual chemotherapeutic. Cyclophosphamide and its phosphoramide muster are actual P450 activated molecules. And basically what goes on, and it's like, okay, so there's cyclophosphamide, but then there are other forms of cyclophosphamide. There are analog molecules of cyclophosphamide that still work in the same way, that are still clinically approved, and they're identified in the thesis. So this isn't bullshit or smoke. It's something for all you chemists and pharmaceutical, I'm going to call you employees, I guess, can play with. Put it into your pipelines. If you're at a big company or something like that, basically go through those drug libraries. What was triggered what was reactive to the P450s? Most of the time this ends up being like some type of reactivity, computational chemistry type of thing. But here's your living proof in front of you. This system has been used, but now it can be used with a machine. And that's essentially what the Joey is trying to capitalize on. This reaction and this molecule. What we found with this, and then there's acetaminophen, which does the exact same thing, which functions under the same type of behavior, where there's your parent molecule, and your parent molecule gets oxidized into a more reactive species, and then it's the more reactive species that does the damage and does the work for you. And in terms of safety, it's an extra layer of peace of mind for the pharmacists or the nurses or the people who aren't necessarily trained to handle. Well, they administer these types of chemicals, but they're not necessarily. No, I'm not giving them enough credit. Let's just say they are. They're trained to handle these types of chemicals and give them to patients. Most of the time, the formulations of the pills provide extra stability for the molecules, and that's pretty much what we're looking at, is how do you provide stability to the molecules, except for at the very last moment, where they go to work. So that's sort of electroactivated chemotherapy in a nutshell. And yeah, there's nothing else. Like you can go okay, so you can go through some of the catalysis and pictures and stuff in the I'll call it in that presentation on the Innovative Potential website. But that's really the Homer Simpson strangling Bart kind of frustration here, because it's like, no, there are actually a lot of molecules that behave this way. There are a lot of possibilities for creating and patenting different molecules that are going to function under this electroactivated chemotherapy. There's a lot of there are over 15 different pairs of these prodrug-drug molecules we dug out of the thesis without actually really investing a lot of time into the chemical research world. These are the electrochemical detectors from the toxicological world, not even in the pharmaceutical world. That's sort of the real that's why I started Innovative Potential, because there is that much value in it. For something as simple as a battery and a pencil lead, this is actually something that can become a really huge global industrial driver of how localized oncological therapies are delivered. Particularly, I'm more of a fan of late stage cancers, because there's really nothing. That's when you're getting into your stage 3 clinical trials. When you're at your stage 3 clinical trials, and this has sort of happened now over the last 10 years. So there's a little bit of historical house cleaning on my part, where it's like, no, I've seen the world without intratumor injection, and I've seen the world without this equipment. No, it's the push for policy to actually like, no, you actually have to sit down and fund it. That's the laser, like that's enough, like that's enough reasoning for any member of parliament or state official to actually sit down and say, yeah, we got to put this in the budget. Just as a scientific endeavor or approach, because you start getting into these like these scientific pissing contests of, oh, but you didn't do this, but yeah, no shit, I didn't do this. You didn't have any money, jackass. You know how fucking expensive these goddamn things are? Anyway, the other half is just sort of like, here's 300 new cell lines you can repeat all of my work on, smartass. And that's sort of the stuff I've been dealing with other cancer research professors, where it's like, oh, I got so far up my own asshole, I didn't produce any results to actually like make a cure or understand stuff, and then you just sort of like just get left cold and shafted. But they're at the prime of their game, and their game is wrong. It's not leading, or you start reading their research and it's like failure for control groups, failure for biological plausibility, and they just keep getting funding, and it's just like, no, it's so fucking bullshit. So that's, sorry for the rant, that's a rant, we're gonna probably cut that out. Where I want to go though is the whole purpose of that is basically that felt good actually. I think I needed that. Anyway, the whole thing about EAC here is basically, so when you do the injection, and I gotta reopen that that presentation again, but when you do that injection, and that's why we have the monolayer here, and I'll pull it back up on the capture. So this is the flow cell experiment, and this sort of what validates it, where it's like, if you electrolyze a prodrug solution and it works, then it works. But what we're talking about here is this. So basically, the way the EAC experiments, the way the EAC experiments are designed, was to have this volume of tumor. So it's basically growth medium with cancerous, so a cancerous like film. And basically what's happening here is we treated the growth medium with the poison, and the poison killed the cells, and the cells stayed down after approximately 24 hours. Okay, whoop-de-doo. You're more... if this was a new molecule, this is a joke. And that's the way everybody sort of approaches it. Like, oh, this is a new molecule. Well, you didn't actually do anything because it's a new molecule. You have to do all of these animal studies, and you have to do all of these other different cell line studies, and you have to do all of this. But we did it with 2 molecules you can take at a fucking grocery store. Well, maybe not cyclophosphamide, but you can do it. But you can, like, you can buy acetaminophen at your grocery store, smartass. You already know everything else. We just don't know if the machine's going to work appropriately enough to knock out, to be cost effective enough, to be worthwhile enough to even consider any additional more expensive molecule ventures. That's why it's important. You already know how cyclophosphamide works because you used it on a cancer patient yourself, dickhead. Like that's the type of idiocy I'm dealing with at your like university level PhD researcher type of like, yay, let's go research cancer stuff. Until they're just like trapped in their, like literally they're trapped in a dead end. They can't get out. Cruel twist of irony is this isn't dead. It just use it on a patient right now because you're using the drug you already used. Like that's sort of the ethical dilemma behind this. It's like unhappiness. It's a lot of unhappiness here. Anyway, the whole point of it is that there is this dilution of there's multiple dilutions that happen from the prodrug being listed. So you got your vial of prodrug. Your vial of prodrug goes through the Joey over there, or your little electrochemical cell. And then it goes into the petri dish with the with whatever you're doing your toxicity testing on. That part there is back when I said the physics is known. Well, the physics is known here because when you go to your CAT scan, you go to your MRIs, you do know what the volume, you do have an approximation of what the volume of these tumors are. So you are able to work out a dilution factor of if I put a drop of, if I put 50 mils of electrolysis solution into a 100 mil tumor, how much dilution would occur? So you go to your volume of a sphere, and you start working through those. It's like you work through your basic elementary school, kind of high school geometry and algebra to figure out what type of dilution of your prodrug solution occurred. It's a 1-to-3 dilution because it's a volume of it, because you're assuming the volume of a sphere or the volume of whatever. So your prodrug solution has to be 3 times higher. I'm going to bite my tongue on that one. It actually has to be approximately 4 to 5 times higher because there is this electrochemical inefficiency. So there's an electrochemical inefficiency involved with the electrolysis, and then there's dilution. But you can get rid of a lot of side effects. Or there's the potential to eliminate a lot of side effects because you're going directly to a problematic tumor instead of going for 18 months worth of metronomic dosing treatments. You might be able to get rid of one of those treatments, which means you get rid of the nausea pills, you get rid of the, there's about 20 different other things that are happening. But for a problematic tumor that is now drug resistant, on your second or third line round of treatment, this starts to look better and better. So what we did to sort of validate the machine in electroactivated chemotherapy is basically we ran a couple of control groups. And that's basically what we're showing here, where it's like, in this one, we use cyclophosphamide against the cells, and cyclophosphamide by itself against these most mammary cancer cells didn't do anything because it needs the activation. No surprise there. It's all over the place because you're dealing with biological variability and stuff, but what you're looking for is something large, and this is a log concentration, so it's like 1 to 5 to 10 to 100. That's the scaling difference that makes it so powerful, because you're going from, no, it's not $100, it's $10,000, or it's not, you know what I mean? Like it's you're skipping. You're not one foot in front of the other. You're sort of like teleporting. But the same thing, we found the same thing for acetaminophen. No difference. But benzoquinone over the same concentration, so 1 to 3 log concentration, you get this massive S curve, and this is sort of the behavior you're actually like really wanting here, where it's just like, nope, it's toxic, and by, you know, to go from 1 to 10, you've already knocked out 10% of your stuff. So if you've managed to sort of injure 10%, so it's like, yeah, if you gave, you know, food poisoning to 10% of your customers, if you owned a restaurant or something, you've already been shut down. You've been shut down at like 1. But that's sort of the sensitivity level here. So this is like incredibly dramatic. Like it's beyond dramatic. It's just like ludicrous speed, maybe. But it's just like, it's demonstrative. If this was a new molecule, like this type of work has to be done if it's a new molecule, so that you know where some of these cutoffs are and where your safety margins are. But because it's oncological, you want to know where you hammer it into the ground, where you hammer that tumor, where you hammer the tumor and the cells into the ground, the cells that are going to cause a problem, and you keep it down. That's why we're looking in this 2 to 3 log concentration range. Because if you stopped administering at like 60%, well, then you just regrow it back, and you've gotten, chances are you've gotten some resistances associated with this, with a 65% survival rate. And that's kind of what happens. And that is what happens. There are a lot more complicated features and techniques and drugs being used at the same time, and it's never just one drug used. So it's always multiple mechanisms. It's always multiple mechanisms right now. Oh, that's what I want. A 3-fold sample dilution to occur. So you have to use your imagination a little bit and understand that any type of injection will be diluted, because you have, well, when you go back to your cancer biology wheel over there, all of those factors are going to dilute. The cells will, that's just sort of assuming that all of the cells are going to uptake everything equally. They don't. So you get some diffusion out into the circulation. Some of it goes into the blood and just kind of goes on a free ride. The cool thing about benzoquinone is you can administer glutathione and sort of like have a systemically circulating antidote. But then the other part is you also get to it's just a really cool subject. But the part I want to get into right now is there is this ability. So most of the cancer drugs are traditionally compounds that target cellular replication based on the speed of replication, because it was going for a good long time. So like the initial 25 years of, I'm going to say 50 years, so the initial 50 years of cancer treatments are finding cancer treatment development is finding molecules that are going to distinguish between your cells and your cancerous cells, because there's not really too much different from them. They have your own DNA, for Christ's sakes. Like there's nothing too different about them. So what a lot of the researchers and the early drug developers were looking at is when the cancer got progressive enough, one of the key defining features is that it kind of like replicates faster than the rate. So it's like maybe a 3-to-1 ratio or 5 or 10 or 100-to-1 ratio compared to your normal healthy cells. And that and sort of that distinction was what the initial cancer drugs were based on. And then creating formulations that would allow them to be distributed without sort of destroying the patient. But in the last 15 to 20 years, we came about with the immunomodulators, and there've been like not to discount them, but there have been a lot of other different mechanisms. So they went from DNA arresters or double strand breakers to mitotic spindle inhibitors to monoclonal antibodies, and those are sort of like my big three jumping points in terms of how the classes of molecules developed and in terms of how the molecular biology developed. But the interesting thing is there's still classes of molecules that have not yet really been explored, mostly because they can't be used. They either get either too reactive, or they get turned into a reactive molecule that, well, there's other, like, the main drugs, the main chemicals that you're not using anymore are really exploring for are the ones that cause cancer themselves, or the ones that get activated into something that then react with the chemical machinery and then they're just too reactive to use, or they're sort of like not applicable. They would be like structure function type of, they get explored in different types of diseases, but they're not necessarily oncological. So those are like voltage gated inhibitors, voltage gated ion channel inhibitors. They're not really kind of investigated for oncological work. So the next thing there is, so basically what I want to say is, for the molecules that react with the P450s that are too reactive to sort of go off, these are the perfect candidate molecules for actually just intratumor injection, because they're going to react locally at the site. You might get a couple of you might get a couple of nanometers of reactivity for them from where they, sort of diffuse out and then they kind of penetrate a little bit. But that's about it, and that's really all you want. That's what I like about benzoquinone, because it's a coagulator. It's very prone to nucleophilic attack, meaning that it's going to react with various sulfur groups. Typically, I use sulfur more than anything, but it's small. It's a small enough molecule to just basically go anywhere. And it's a small enough molecule to be reactive enough to almost to almost anything, kind of. There is some evidence that it can do lipid peroxidation as well. So it becomes an external attack on the cancer microenvironment, and that's the interesting part. That's sort of the reason why to look into this. Cyclophosphamide works by attacking the DNA strands. But there is a lot of work in the online literature that suggests that there are increased countermeasures from the cancerous cells protecting the DNA from this type of stuff. That's a justification for why you need to investigate non-cellular replication type of injectables. And what we're saying, and that's basically kind of where benzoquinone comes in. That's kind of where you kind of want to go into non-mitotic toxicants. So things that are not targeting cell division. That comes from the monoclonal antibodies. That's a type of non-mitotic toxicant. It's an immunological. I'm going to use toxicant for lack of a better word. And mostly because I want to use this line here, but it's like you're looking for ubiquitous pathways that you can shut down, but only locally. And for sort of your worst case scenarios, or your scenarios that where this is going to work or this is going to respond well, or and when you kind of look at your clinician level, like when you're looking at your radiation, the types of cancer that are going to respond well to radiation, that's kind of what we're talking about with electroactivated chemotherapy. It's the same type of mindset and mentality, and those are your first protocols, and those are your first sets to basically get rid of an old ghost kind of thing. Those are the protocols. Those are the. Yeah, I want to repeat that for a soundbite. So basically, if you're in clinic, my recommendation is basically, if you got to go through ethics and everything, but if you're interested in local electroactivated chemotherapy, start with your radiation profile cancerous tumors. So the tumors that are going to look really well to responding to radiation, but then radiation and electrochemotherapy with intratumor injection. Those are your two. That's sort of the two basic control groups that you first start your initial in clinic work with, or your animal study. With your sort of standard of care, you do your standard of care without this, and then standard care with this. Those are your two main type of treatments or treatment designs. All of this is to just get away from data for the sake of data, because basically what would be asked of a PhD is, okay, that's great. Repeat everything you just did with about 10 different cell lines, and then we're going to have you do an animal model on top of it, and then we're going to have you do a cellular review on top of it, and we're cramming it into 4 years, and we're not going to give you any help, and we're not going to give you any funding, and then we're going to tax you 50%. So how does that sound for a hot date? Like, that sounds like fucking hot shit. That's a bum deal. That's useless. But that's the way it is. And it's useless. So to get away from that, it's sort of like, no, you kind of need like you need to bite the bullet and set up You have to have that. You start with an animal and then you start with the person, or you start with human cell lines, or you do that. Like that's sort of where we're at now. Does the tumor even shrink if I inject cyclophosphamide? No, because you gotta electroactivate it first, smartass. Those are those glib and sharp comments are questions that I've been asked by people that actually do have a doctoral title in oncology, and they're sitting there with their fucking thumb up their ass talking to me. Yeah, I'm a bit pissed off about that because you're supposed to be the expert. I'm going to these people and I met with I didn't read it, send them all the fucking information ahead of time, and they're sitting there like, oh, I didn't read it. Fuck you. Fuck you. Or they're willing to help, but they're not really actually willing to help. That's a favorite political move. We're like, yeah, sure, I'll help you, man, but I'm actually never going to do fucking shit for you. And I'm going to ignore you and just hope you go away. But that's not the way it works, because this isn't a new molecule. This is fucking cyclophosphamide. Every oncologist in the goddamn world knows what Cytoxan is. It's on the World Health Organization's list of most of essential drugs for your society, for countries. It's like you're out of excuses. Eventually, you do exhaust your drug development pipelines. Then you combine that with drug and antibiotic resistances. Wow, it's a humdinger for sure. That's sort of like... that is the state of the art, according to me. So... what do I know? But the thing that's really cool about this is, yeah, you can get... so the big three takeaways are: you can start designing molecules to fit electroactivated chemotherapy to either extend the life, improve efficiency, or just general safety of the molecule in transit. That's always a fun one. Everybody likes safe molecules. If I drop or break a bottle of, something, I don't want to have to get cancer from the drop. People prefer to use the drug knowing that there is that type of oxidative safety feature in the molecule itself. I will buy more drug of something that I like. If I break it and a toxic fume comes out of it, I don't want to fucking deal with that. If I break it and it's generally considered as safe, then it's basically a sugar water and I can wash my hands with soap and water and not have any problems. Yeah, I love it. I'll buy more of it. I will continue to use it because it is safer at a faster scale of volume and a faster turnover. I don't want my employees getting cancer for their stupidity or an accident. That being said, the cool part about this is you basically use bleach to wash, deactivate. Bleach isn't the best thing, but bleach will deactivate a lot of these electrophilic molecules, including benzoquinone and including cyclophosphamide. So safer molecules, safer supply lines, safer administration lines, and safer general use is one of the promises of electroactivated chemotherapy. One of the other promises of electroactivated chemotherapy is better control over the placement of the chemical and volumes and amounts of the chemicals used. And that's through its delivery of intratumor injection. There may be some molecules, and I'm just using the really hyper-focused intratumor injection. There may be prodrug molecule pairs that are really unstable for UV light or longevity reasons, but you can stabilize them with a small oxidizable functional group that then allows your molecule to be intravenously delivered. And of course, I'm saying oxidation, but at the same time, the whole system works in a reductive capacity as well. So you basically doubled the use of molecules that can be invented, discovered, or capitalized upon that aren't, because there's no route of administration. There's no that is like literally solely dependent on that machine, on a fucking pencil lead. So better chemical safety, more molecules to use, better routes of administration, and better placement and control. So I am out of time, and you've been great. Thanks. A bientôt. Ciao. Actually, I got to repeat that last part. So the four main advantages of electroactivated chemotherapy are better chemical molecules, better safety, industrial safety development, distribution supply lines, better safety profiles for molecules if it's a non-toxic prodrug to a toxic activated compound. The second is you get a more variety of compounds to use in terms of mechanism of action, at least in the oncological world. Every other drug is still every other disease is still every other disease that you want to pick focus on and treat. Having something that is activatable into an active compound allows you to put protective molecules around the active functional site groups that allow your short-lived molecules to preserve longer. Through the use of intratumor injection, you get an increase in the control and placement of where you're actually going to put the drugs. And that's sort of on par with brachytherapy or photodynamic therapy, where you actually just implant something and just kind of go with that. This can be miniaturized to an implantable little electrochemical cell with a drug reservoir. So you're really not losing anything. There's only stuff to gain. And 4 is, it's a different technique, it's a different mechanism. It can open doors to different types of to different drugs, to different diseases, by investigating some of the intravenous applications of electroactivated chemotherapy. You might end up with some monoclonal antibodies or something that need to have that type of protection to survive the shipping and storage portion of their life cycle. Now, with 24-hour, the future is wide open. The markets in the future are wide open. You're fighting Pokemon with molecules here. I choose you, cyclophosphamide. No, I choose you, acetaminophen. And then they just sort of go like this. Which one's the best? We invented a marketplace that you're literally fighting molecules over. We fucking wrath. Anyway.